This is the shittest firm. The shittest firm I've ever met. Look. Shit mob. Hit me. God, hit me. Hit me. He's turned up a balaclava on. You've all got balaclavas on. Wankers.
The confrontation between Tommy Robinson and a group of 10 masked activists was more than a chaotic farmyard moment. It was a snapshot of Britain's increasingly polarized political climate. The masked group clearly arrived hoping to intimidate him, using balaclavas as a symbol of threat and anonymity. But the dynamic flipped almost immediately. Robinson mocked the setting, laughed at their attempts to look menacing, and turned what was meant to be a display of intimidation into something closer to a comedy sketch. His repeated laughter, taunts like "hit me, God," and the final "let's go wonkers" weren't random outbursts. They were a deliberate psychological counter. Instead of playing into the fear-based theater the masked group tried to create, Robinson stripped their performance of any power by refusing to take them seriously. The result is that the very people who intended to project strength ended up looking unsure, awkward, and ineffective. That's why the clip spread. It reverses the expected roles. The group meant to intimidate becomes the punchline, and Robinson walks away appearing unfazed and in control. In an era where optics matter more than ever, this moment shows how quickly a supposed show of force can collapse when the target simply laughs in its face.
This is just broken, so I'd be interested to get your take on it. The COVID inquiry, that thing that's costing us about £175,000 every day while not inquiring into what we all need to find out about. Did the lockdowns work? They're not even considering that question because the answer is they didn't. But the COVID inquiry seems to think that it's a given that lockdowns are brilliant. They're not. But that's what the COVID inquiry has pre-decided, even though we're spending all that money to look into it. No question of examining whether or not lockdowns were worth it. They were a disaster. They were a catastrophe. We must never do it again. COVID inquiry, not looking into that. Anyway, Isabel, here's the deal. Chaos. The COVID inquiry has just produced its initial report saying that chaos at the heart of Boris Johnson's government and a failure to take COVID-19 seriously cost 23,000 lives in the first wave of the pandemic. Now, I'd say two things about that. First of all, how do they quantify 23,000 lives? My feeling is this is a left-leaning inquiry that loves lockdowns and was always going to have a go at a Tory government. I don't think there's any doubt that Boris's government was pretty chaotic in its stewardship of the COVID pandemic, of the crisis, if you like. But I'm not entirely trusting of this inquiry. I think they were always going to say this. How do you think they came up with this 23,000 lives? Seems like a very round number, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, I share your skepticism, Kev. I mean, I actually, having sort of been on the inside of this story, having worked on the Pandemic Diaries book, which is based on evidence from Matt Hancock and all those WhatsApp messages that I read, I'm not actually sure it's fair to say that in the beginning stages of the pandemic there was any more chaos than might have been expected. You know, this was a first time anything like this had ever happened. And in fact, in fairness to the then health secretary, he had been taking this virus pretty seriously from the very beginning of the year. You know, you'll remember that we went into lockdown at the end of March, didn't we? And the government, of course, they didn't want to rush into any kind of lockdown. I mean, this whole inquiry seems to have started from the premise that more lockdowns would have been a good thing, whereas I'm coming from precisely the opposite premise, that lockdowns are absolutely the last resort. And, you know, I feel the first lockdown was in some ways justifiable or even potentially necessary, whilst the experts, the medics, the scientists worked out what was this thing that we were dealing with. I find it very hard to believe that if the whole nation had kind of judded to a halt at the beginning of March, somehow that would have prevented this thing ever kind of felling as many people as it tragically did, because ultimately it's a sort of false premise to try to keep a respiratory virus at bay just by keeping everyone inside indefinitely.
Absolutely, and I just got some more information. Unsurprisingly, the COVID inquiry has concluded that the government response to the pandemic in March 2020, as you just relayed, was too little too late. This whole inquiry has been based on trying to decide whether or not we should have locked down much earlier, or whether, and just whether or not we should have locked down for much longer, more and more lockdowns. What we want to know, I'm just watching Baron Hallett, the chairwoman of the Baroness Hallett of the chairwoman of the inquiry, pontificating. I've got a message for you. Can you stop wasting our time and stop? I'm looking at her on the telly now. I'm shouting at her. I don't know why. It's a really pointless thing to do, but I'm going to do it anyway. Stop wasting our time and stop wasting our money, you old windbag. Seriously, it's all based around, predicated on, did we lock down early enough and did we lock down long enough? And of course, the conclusion is too little too late. And as I say, had we only have imposed a lockdown 1 week earlier than we did, we could have saved 23,000 lives in England. What a handy round number that is. This is really annoying. 175 grand a day for this claptrap, this politically charged claptrap.
I mean, I've been very opposed to the whole way that the COVID inquiry has been set up. It's frankly ludicrous that only now, almost 6 years after the event, are we getting the earliest conclusions of this ridiculously protracted and unbelievably over-expensive investigation. You know, most people have kind of just about got ready to move on from the pandemic at this point. I mean, I consider myself someone who was almost obsessive about the impact of lockdowns and the minutiae of the pandemic, but even I now am beginning to think, really, you know, are we really going to be going over this all right now? I would have loved to have heard these all these evidence sessions many years ago. The whole thing, when you look at the remit of the COVID inquiry, it's absolutely gargantuan. They've tried to cover almost every angle you could possibly conceive of, apart from the very one.
Yeah, exactly. Apart from the one question we want answered. Should we lock down at all? And in fact, I can answer that question, and so can you, Isabel. The answer is no. We must never do that again. Look at the we are still in a massive mess, economically, socially, culturally, because of the lockdowns. We have never recovered. And this inquiry that will only consider whether or not we should have locked down earlier or longer it's an insult to our intelligence.